You're about to win your first Grand Prix. It doesn't matter. You know, you have got a lot to deal with, a lot going on in your head.
Yeah, that was some proper racing that we all got behind.
Watching Charles and Lewis today go at it, honestly, truly enjoyed it.
The cancellation, it's been confirmed now, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia will not be going ahead, so we basically won't have any races in April at all.
Really enjoying the stewards not getting involved.
We have to talk briefly about Alisha. I
think I'm really confident that we can be in the fight for the championship. I think having the year of experience under my belt from last year, I've developed a lot as a person and as a driver.
Welcome back to the Talking Ball podcast, powered by Trade Chinese Grand Prix edition. We've got a bunch to talk about on a sprint weekend to boot as well. Calum Nicholas, how are we doing, buddy?
Mate, I'm doing good, man. Watched that race and we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot to dissect from this weekend. I guess kind of first question I wanted to ask you straight away is, because this was a sprint weekend, because we only get the one FP1 session, from kind of a team personnel, pit crew, behind the scenes point of view, how does that change kind of preparation going into a weekend like this versus what we had in Australia?
It is different, and obviously only having that one FP1 does sort of change the way you approach the weekend. And certainly for the mechanics and the pit crew, that means you've only got one practice session to do live pit stops and things like that. So there's a lot of small changes. I wouldn't say it drastically affects the way you have to approach the weekend as sort of a mechanic or a technician on the ground. But it's just different, you know? And I think early on in this new regulation set, it's just another thing to think about while you've got plenty of stuff going on already.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of plates being spun at the minute, it feels like, in Formula 1. We saw a lot of cars not even make the race on Sunday as well. But yeah, obviously sprint weekend, you know, Mercedes doing what they've been doing and kind of leading from the front. They look like a serious force at the start of the season. I mean, we've got to shout out, first of all, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, become the youngest F1 pole sitter of all time and then winning the Grand Prix. It was a very, very impressive weekend, gotta say.
You know what, shout out to Kimi, firstly for the pole, because, you know, that's where it kind of really mattered for him this weekend. I think it's easy to say, oh, well, he probably wasn't challenged out the front, but, you know, you're about to win your first Grand Prix. It doesn't matter. You know, you have got a lot to deal with, a lot going on in your head. I don't think it was necessarily an easy car to drive all day. We saw him have that lock up down into the hairpin towards the end of the race. So I don't think it was necessarily all smooth sailing for him. So, you know, I don't really want to hear any detractors. You know, shout out to Kimi, fair play, great job. Got that first win in the bag. It must take a huge leap of pressure off your shoulders to get that first one in the bag. So yeah, shout out to him. We'll see how he gets on the rest of the year now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he made it look fairly comfortable, which is, again, more credit to him. Lewis was putting big pressure on him early doors. And we did have some, you know what, I very much enjoyed that Grand Prix. I know it's still very much the court of public opinion at the moment to how much of this racing is a bit too artificial, the battery deployment, all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed it for what it was, Cal, I'd say.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think, for me, Lewis and Charles saved that race.
That's a good point.
I think a little bit for me, I think we're going to have this thing clearly at the beginning where Ferrari can get great starts. They can be in the battle with Mercedes. I do kind of feel like as the year goes on, that's something that we're going to see, and that might sort of get a little bit boring. But because, you know, I think ultimately we all kind of know that in the end, Mercedes are probably going to have what it takes to go on and win the race in that situation. We need more people to get involved in those early battles. But watching Charles and Lewis today go at it, honestly, truly enjoyed it. And, you know, listening to them post-race, it seems like they truly enjoyed it as well. It seems like Lewis had a great time out there. Charles really enjoyed his battle with his teammate. So that was kind of a bit of a saving grace for the Chinese Grand Prix. And I guess we can only hope that those continue through the season.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I mean, that's the thing. Typically, at the start of a regulation cycle, the field is a bit accordioned out, so you need to rely on those inter-teammate battles. And yeah, that was some proper racing that we all got behind. The Oracle Red Bull Racing point of view, not quite as good a weekend as we'd have liked, but what we'll do first of all is pass on to the drivers, Max and Isack, to give their debriefs after this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix.
Yeah, I mean, just a very tough weekend for us, like pace-wise, grip-wise. And then, of course, the retirement. So a lot of things to analyze, learn from, and be better at, to be honest. This is, of course, not where we want to be. I think everyone is feeling the same, right? We don't want to be here. We want to be better. So that's what we'll try to work on now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. I had a good start of lap 1. I had a good fight with Oli. Got the place, and then honestly, the snap I got was so sudden. Couldn't put anything to save it, really. So it was a bit of a shame. I think we nailed the strategy to make the most of our difficult start, and to bring home 4 points, I think, is very good.
How do you feel now? 2 races down. Do you feel like you're getting comfortable? Do you feel like there's still things you want to work out in this car and pace to find?
Yeah, there's only pace to unlock, really. I'm really comfortable, and yeah, I feel easy to go and maximize what I have underneath me, but now we just need both cars to go faster.
Right, so should we start with Isack, I suppose, because, he had a strong start, a good start to lap 1, great fight with Ollie. Ollie was definitely over the line in that overtake up the inside, couldn't keep it on track, and of course the spin. I think the pace we saw from Isack as the race played out showed that, he was P8 in the end, 4 points on the board, but there was some decent performance underneath him.
Yeah, I think, look, he's really clear about it. I think it was an important race for him. Obviously, after Australia, he really needs to get these race laps under his belt. So for him, from that point of view, being able to have a couple of battles, work his way back to where he should have sort of been after a pretty poor start, I think it was good for him to just get those race laps in. And I agree with you. I think, probably Ollie was a little bit beyond what we should expect from racing. The spin, like we've seen so many of these kind of spins now, right, where you just get that little bit of extra power, and you try and contain it, and like he said, there was nothing you could do about it. But yeah, look, like I said, I think from the position he's in, he's come home with points after what he went through in Australia. I think it was an important race weekend for him to just get those laps under his belt and now look forward.
Yeah, I think rear end instability, as you say, has caught out a lot of drivers. I guess how much of it's hard to know, because there's a few drivers have been caught out where they've got power that they've not expected. So, for example, Oscar, before he even started the race in Australia, versus just these cars just being lower grip, I think as a fan watching, and certainly, again, the jury's out when it comes to these power units and as the teams start to understand them. But I think from a chassis point of view, and the amount of grip available to these drivers, I think things are in a really good place from that point of view, and we're seeing drivers have to really work for the performance underneath them. Yeah,
again, agree. And look, it's one of those things, like Isack said, we're getting more comfortable, and things are, necessarily, we just need both cars to go a little bit faster. You look at those battles with Ferrari, like with Charles and Lewis, Isack and Max, they just want to be involved in these battles, right? And it's such a shame that we're not in a position to sort of get involved in that. Because it improved the quality of the race, I think, for everyone, but also because, these are the battles that people like Max and Isack live for. This is what they want, right? So it's a bit of a shame that we've got some work to do to catch up to the cars ahead of us. But yeah, we just got to keep working away at it, mate.
Yeah, the positive sign here, what Isack said, only pace to unlocked. I'm really comfortable and feel easy to maximise what I have underneath me. So that is incredibly promising, right? Because I think Isack's come into the team. He's a new driver, obviously Racing Bulls last season, but new to Oracle Rebel Racing this year. And to hear these words from him so early on in the season is massively, I think, confidence inspiring for the rest of this year. Once the car gets more performance, be that through the engine, be that through the chassis.
I think it's a great start. Like you said, he knew that there was building to do. He knew that there was work to do. These are all things that are not a surprise to anyone, right? So yeah, great start. Good to see him in good spirits, and I'm sort of optimistic for the fact that we can improve this car and that he will benefit largely from it.
Absolutely. And of course, Max having to put on a bit of a recovery drive himself, obviously bogging down off the start. He said himself, just tough weekend, pace-wise, grip-wise. For Max to recover to the point he did before the retirement, again, it kind of paints a picture. Obviously, we didn't see either of the McLarens running at all in this Grand Prix, of where we are kind of sitting in the pecking order. It seems to be, McLaren seem to be our closest competitor. And I think if Max wasn't having to do the recovery drive, it would have probably been best of the rest, given, where he was relative to Ollie Behrman, obviously, at the time. And Haas, who did a fantastic job this weekend, by the way, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great job from Haas with that car. I think it's a track that tends to suit them. They had a similar result last year, right? So it's obviously a track that Haas, the engineering team, they understand it. From Max's point of view, yeah, look, 2 races this weekend, 2 starts where the car just sort of bogged down and left him absolutely helpless. And you can almost, when you watch the onboard, you must just feel his frustration as cars are just like ploughing past you either side. Like, it must be like, it's brutal to see. It really is to watch. It's absolutely brutal. So yeah, some work to be done, certainly figuring that out.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. We're going to see that, I feel like, a lot at the start of this season as teams, I guess, push the limits as well, right? Because as a driver, you want to be right on that edge. And as the understanding to how to optimize these starts, which again, coming into this season, they've added this kind of 5-second delay. You can see it on the boards, and the rules are very much actively evolving. And there's been a lot of talk around, should the race starts change? And of course, some teams are pushing for that more than others, and everyone's got their own, competitive advantage or disadvantage that they want to kind of play into. But it's so many drivers getting caught out by this that it just feels like right now it is a bit of a shot in the dark. And as the season goes on, I like to think we will see these things happen, because also it can be kind of dangerous. I mean, Max got away well enough, but we saw last weekend, of course, with Liam, where that almost ended in a pretty big accident. So yeah, I think the starts are so imperative. However, I would say that these cars can clearly race. I mean, again, that Ferrari battle we mentioned earlier, that ability to go wheel to wheel. We need kind of a clean weekend to really see where we sit in the competitive order, and also allow, Max and Isack to actually go racing, because it feels like, again, from an aero point of view, these cars can go wheel to wheel.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, with the starts, like you said, there's always this fine balance of making sure that we are putting safety first. And obviously with Liam last week was really like, that was close, man. So obviously this week, Max got away from the line, and you can always expect that teams have their own agendas. They're going to argue for different things with the FIA and try and make things work out for them. That's the nature of the sport, right? So I guess it's that fine balance, but as long as we're always sort of thinking about the safety of it all first, that's what it is. We've just got to work on our starts and make them better. As for the cars racing wheel to wheel, I'm still really conflicted, because like you said, we saw some really good battles that were about car, driver ability and car handling, and the way that these cars do seem a lot more lively. And I think it did contribute to some good racing today. I also think that there were some overtakes and some bits of the racing that in many ways become a little bit meaningless, right? There's still this yo-yo of power units, this back and forth where it's just about battery deployment. And I've got to be honest, I don't think that contributes anything, like long-term to the racing. I think with the chassis regs, well, from what I've seen of these chassis regs, I think if we had last year's engines with these chassis, we would have been in for some great racing, right? This is it. It's just the fact that we've done everything at once. We've had this massive reset, and it's easy to say that with hindsight, right? I get it. It's easy to say with hindsight. Could you imagine if we had these chassis with last year's power unit? But yeah, like I say, it's one of those things. I think you've got to find this balance between making the racing genuine but also enjoyable and exciting. Like today, we saw some great, enjoyable racing. We did also see some overtakes and some bits of it that they just don't really amount to anything of meaning. So we've just got to keep progressing through this rule set. And like you say, it's ever evolving. This is something that's constantly in discussion, trying to make it better throughout the season.
And from that point of view, Calum, in terms of, when it comes to cooling and some kind of issue, retiring the car again to protect not just the components directly involved, but I guess if you're going to get potential for fire and heat and all that, it's not worth it, right? In the grand scheme of things, if you're so sure that, right, we've got a really big problem here, there's heat involved, and it's just not worth carrying on.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think by the looks of what happened to Max today, it got to a point where we weren't going to be able to, maintain a points position anyway. So, there comes a point where there's really no point continuing damaging hardware, putting yourself in a position later on in the year where you've got to take penalties. Obviously, we're hoping that we can improve this car throughout the season. The last thing we want to do is get 3/4 of the way in, and then we've got to take another penalty to take another battery or whatever it was that was under risk of being damaged, right? So, yes, like you say, it becomes a bit of a false economy to continue. So you have to do what you got to do.
What will the debrief look like now, going from China to Japan? What is the process going to be going on right now as we speak about, an hour and a half after the race is finished? What's the process going on both at Milton Keynes and in China?
Yeah, I mean, look, similarly to what we had post-Australia, there will be parts of a power unit and certainly a lot of data back in Milton Keynes being analysed, finding out not just necessarily what went wrong, because I think we understand that, if we have an issue with the cooling system of the ERS, it might be a really obvious issue. It might be just you've seen a leak, right? So it's not necessarily that there's much to analyse there, but there might also be things where you can look at the data and say, there's ways where we can protect ourselves from this. So it might be about finding countermeasures for going forward, but there's a lot of analysis to do. I think there's work to be done everywhere. As you said, first and foremost, it's going to be about making sure that you can start and finish every race and perform to the level that we expect, at least where we're at right now. So yeah, plenty of analysis to do before Japan. I kind of get the impression that, with the cancellation of Bahrain and Saudi, that there'll be a little bit of respite, hopefully, and it might be much needed. It gives everybody just a little bit of extra time to reset, look at what they've got and try and find solutions when we get to Miami after Japan.
The cancellation, it's been confirmed now, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia will not be going ahead, so we basically won't have any races in April at all. How, Calum, do you think the team will have reacted to that I'm thinking more in terms of upgrades, because we know at this early part of the season, there's going to be a lot of change come into these cars quite quickly as everyone looks at everyone else's homework and realizes, I'm going to copy that, because that's what happens in F1, let's be real. And how, are the team going to be able to maybe bring forward some upgrades that they might not have previously, because we've got that big gap that's opened up now? Like, are those lead times a bit too long to react in that way?
Well, I mean, I got to say, as somebody who wants to see us get back into positions where we can win, I'd love to say I hope so, right? I think, my experience with bringing updates to the car is that you do have a schedule, but when unexpected windows like this open, there perhaps is opportunities to say, well, we're not putting resources here for these races. Perhaps we can use them to bring an upgrade forward. It's all with these things. It's always just about balancing your resources, and I don't just mean financially. In terms of personnel and people hours, right, to get these things done. So perhaps that little bit of respite in April might provide some opportunities to do that, but I really don't know.
Let's hope we can cook something. I mean, Japan's going to be like, what a track, by the way, a proper driver's track as well. It's going to be really interesting to see how these cars, again, with the power units, it's not quite as energy starved as Australia, but there's still, it's no Hungaroring, it's no Monaco in terms of higher braking zone. So I wonder how much super clipping we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to be honest, if I see cars derating through 130R, it's going to break my heart a little bit. It's one of my favourite tracks to watch drivers drive through. I know Max is a big fan of it as well. That sector 1 is like amazing, seeing cars go through sector 1. But it's going to be tough if we do have that situation where you've got cars sort of derating into 130R, because it's such an epic corner and you kind of just want to see cars absolutely flat chat through there.
Absolutely. I mean, it isn't even, in recent regulations, that corner's not really been much of a corner, is it? Because you can just full pin. But I mean, we'll see. I'm staying cautiously optimistic. And in terms of optimism, by the way, we have to talk briefly about Alisha Palmovsky, who, of course, in F1 Academy secured a P2 finish. Let's hear from Alisha herself.
Yeah, I think the weekend has been really positive overall, to be honest. I think obviously it was a big shame today not to come home with the race win after starting on pole position. Ultimately, the race was lost at the start, to be honest, just a minor misjudgment, but I lost the 2 places that were then so difficult to regain. It's such a difficult circuit to follow around, such a difficult circuit to make progress and overtake just due to the aero wash. So I put my head down, tried to regain those positions. I think the race pace was really strong. It was a big step forwards from yesterday and a night and day step forwards from last year. So there's lots of positives to take away. The race pace is really strong, but just couldn't quite get the move done. But I do believe we were fastest on circuit today, came away with fastest laps. So there's a lot of positives. It's still early days in the championship. There's a long, long way to go. So good championship points backed. I think I'm really confident that we can be in the fight for the championship. I think having the year of experience under my belt from last year, I've developed a lot as a person and as a driver. So I think hopeful of that knowledge and experience gained can help me in the future races. I also think this circuit is a bit of a weaker one for me. It just doesn't naturally suit my driving style. It just has never really clicked. So considering that, I think it's been a decent weekend, and I'm more confident for the future races, the future circuits that we're going to. So game on.
So Calum, she didn't get the results she would have hoped for, but surely, fastest car on track, she felt like this weekend. There's a lot of positives to take from this weekend for Alisha.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you see in that interview, it's one of those things where you can tell in her and her manner that she's confident about the rest of this season. And I think she should be. She's had a great weekend. You're not always going to get the result you want, but it seems to me like even when she's talking about understanding that China's not perhaps one of her strongest circuits, it seems like that to me is a sign of confidence. When you sort of understand that about yourself and you can say, yeah, I know this isn't one of my strongest circuits, but I'm confident for the rest of the season. That's great to see. And a great result for her for work. So well done. When
she came onto the scene last year as well, immediately competitive. So I think a championship run could absolutely be on the cards this year. Let's see, fingers crossed for Alisha. Fan question, I guess the most pertinent, important one from this weekend. And we've got one from Philip 1801. What happened with Max that caused the retirement? So, of course, we know what the retirement was, but Calum, I guess we don't know for sure, but what do you imagine could be the types of things that would cause this kind of ERS coolant fault that we've seen this weekend? What could it have been that caused this issue?
The most obvious one is just an outright leak in the system. That would be the most obvious thing. Then obviously that's the first thing the mechanics will be looking for when that car gets back to the garage, is if you take the bodywork off it and you find a pile of water somewhere, that'll be something that will have been noticed by your controls engineers as they look at the data, and they can just see the water pressure coming down and down. So if that is the case, then it's really obvious. It could be something that's not necessarily an external leak. Obviously, these batteries and the way they work, you kind of hope that you haven't got something internally in the circuit where you're losing pressure. Also, it can be in the morning when you start these cars, there's a whole process to go through of setting ERS pressure and making sure you've got the right level in the header tank with the right amount of air versus water. It can be quite a tricky thing. And I know that the ERS technicians, they spent a very long time with the rig just trying to bleed the system, right? It's such a hard system to bleed all the air out of. And I know we've had it in the past where, you go out in practice, you think the system's pressurized, and as soon as you get around the circuit, you start to lose pressure because there's a bit of air that you hadn't quite got out and it's moved around. So it's hard to say what it is. The mechanics will be hoping something that's really obvious. One of the hardest things, and certainly as someone used to doing engines, is when you have like a reported loss of pressure in a system, you are just praying that you find it straight away as soon as you start stripping the car. Because if you don't find it straight away, then what's going to happen is the entire system is going to go into quarantine. If you can't obviously find a leak, that entire system, all of its pipework, header tanks, lines, all of it is going to go into a quarantine state and will need to go back to the factory, and all of it will need to be tested. I've had this in the past where you're on like a double, triple header, especially towards the end of the season where you're not blessed with loads of parts with loads of new mileage on them. So it can be really inconvenient when that happens. So you want to hope that it's just a really obvious fault. You find perhaps a chafed pipe or something that's split or an O-ring that's nipped up. You're hoping that it's something like that. And I hope for them that it's something like that, because neither the design office nor those technicians want to have to be dealing with loads of stuff in a quarantine state.
No, that sounds like a nightmare. I just thought it'd be it's like 1,000 horsepower radiator that you just use the radiator bleed key and sorts it right out. These I'm just curious, Cal, these kind of leaks, we hear about leaks all the time, from coolant systems, hydraulic leaks, or Alex Albon didn't even start the race. He had a hydraulic leak on his Williams. Are these typically, are these pipes breaking? Are these O-rings failing? Is there a typical thing you'd look at first that's more likely to go wrong than others?
For me, the first thing you look at is any bit of pipe work that's a flexible hose, right? So a lot of the pipe work, you've got like a solid metallic piece. It's really rare that those will leak unless they've chafed against another one. But often with the flexi section of hoses, where essentially they've been built and they've been swaged onto the ends, you can often find things with that. I'd like to think that if it was an O-ring issue, you would have discovered it really early on in the weekend, because I wasn't at the circuit, but as far as I know, we weren't unplugging and replugging in the ERS system and the radiators, so it's kind of unlikely. But like I said, there's so many things. You look at the obvious bits, the parts of a system that when you look at them as a mechanic, you say that looks like a weaker point, right? You might have a hose that's in a really awkward position and you've been worried about it for a while and things like that. So we'll see.
We will see indeed. Time will tell. Look, Cal, pleasure as always. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining Talking Ball this weekend. And any final thoughts coming out of China? A great track, by the way. Very underrated, if you ask me.
The one thing that I'm always reminded of in Shanghai is that the racing can be really good on the circuit. I think it's a really good layout for some competitive racing. If I was to think like my one takeaway, and I'm going to continue it on from last week in Australia actually, was that I am really enjoying the stewards not getting involved. Right, and we saw it a few times today as well, where I know Pierre Gasly had a bit of a moan about Max and his overtake on Max, and we saw with some other drivers that they went at it, and it's just nice to see them be allowed to race. And I think as this goes on, and if we keep on this same path, you will see drivers, start to take bigger risks that they weren't willing to take previously, not because it was a bad idea for racing, but because the risk of getting a penalty. And I thought that always detracted from the racing. So it's nice to see the stewards not getting involved, letting them get on with it. They're all pros. A lot of them, most of them have been doing it for a very long time. So that's one of my biggest takeaways so far this season is I think there's been a real change from race direction and stewarding, and that I am enjoying. And it is promoting good racing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the more you allow these drivers to kind of self-police, the more they will all eventually be like, okay, we're all gonna give each other a little bit more racing room, a little bit more respect, and we'll get more of that racing like we saw wheel to wheel with Charles and Lewis. I'm sure part of that is because they're teammates and they definitely don't want to hit each other, but also like that was prime right there. And we got some really good racing, I think, throughout the midfield as well, which was good to see. Thank you all for joining us wherever you are in the world, for listening, watching, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, however you consume the Talking Ball podcast, powered of course by Arbitrade. We will see you next time for our Japanese Grand Prix post-race debrief. Pleasure as always. We'll see you next time.